Not even the military could save us. The day I almost killed a man just to stay alive wasn't the day the world ended. It ended long before that. People always think the world ends with an explosion. It doesn't. It ends with silence. My name is Nicole. I'm 35, just an ordinary woman trying to make rent, keep the lights on, and mind my own business in Memphis. Nothing special. Nothing heroic. And then one morning, the highways went quiet. Not quiet like a Sunday morning. Quiet like something was wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. The truck drivers had stopped, every single one of them. They'd been warning the country for years about the pay, the abuse, the impossible schedules, the disrespect, but nobody listened. Not really. Not until the day every engine went silent at once. On the first day, I stood outside my apartment and looked at I-55. No hum, no vibration under the concrete, no streaks of headlights, just dead asphalt stretching into the horizon like an abandoned artery. That silence scared me more than any siren ever could. By the end of the week, shelves looked like rib cages, bare, exposed, vulnerable. People hovered in aisles like hungry ghosts, grabbing anything left behind. One night, leaving a grocery store with a single can of ravioli, I felt someone following me. I heard the footsteps before I saw him, slow, heavy, deliberate. When I turned, he ducked behind a van. My stomach dropped. I tightened my grip on my keys and walked faster, heart slamming against my ribs. He closed the distance instantly. When I reached my car, he grabbed a fistful of my jacket and yanked me backward so hard my legs flew out from under me. My back hit the concrete, knocking the air out of my lungs. His breath smelled like sour beer and rot as he pinned me by my shoulders. I remember the gravel biting into my palms. I remember the metallic taste of blood from where I bit my cheek. I remember thinking, I can't die in a Kroger parking lot. I kicked until my shin connected with his groin. He howled, loosened his grip, and I scrambled to my car like an animal crawling toward a hole. I slammed the door just as he yanked the handle. He pounded on the window, rage twisting his face before limping away. That was the night I realized the world was truly slipping. When the government finally woke up, it was already too late. They held press conferences with polished smiles, but their eyes showed the truth. They had no idea what to do. Negotiations with truckers went nowhere. Promises were too little, too late. People were already desperate. And then the looting began in earnest. From my apartment balcony, I watched men break into the corner store with pipes and bats. They moved like a coordinated pack, fast, ruthless, hungry. They weren't stealing luxuries. They were stealing survival. Water, canned beans, diapers. One man walked out with a shotgun he didn't have when he walked in. Memphis PD didn't show up. They couldn't. They didn't have the fuel or the manpower. I remember gripping the railing, feeling the cold metal bite my skin, thinking. The government's only option was to call in America's last resort, the entire remaining force of the United States military. This was only the beginning. When the military rolled into Memphis, people actually cried. Real tears, hope, exhaustion, relief. News reporters said it with confidence, like the cavalry was riding in to save us. I stood in line once, and I'll never forget the sight of a convoy of military trucks rolling down Elvis Presley Boulevard, headlights cutting through the smoke from half-burned buildings. Convoys thundered down the streets. Soldiers in full tactical gear tossed boxes of food and MRE meals from the backs of trucks. But the boxes were gone before they even hit the pavement. The lines wrapped around blocks. Tired mothers, hollow-eyed fathers, kids with gray lips from dehydration. The man behind me collapsed face first onto the sidewalk. Not a faint, not a stumble, a full collapse. His wife screamed and shook him, but he didn't move. The soldier near us just stared, helpless, overwhelmed, only whispering, I'm sorry. Even with all their power, discipline, and machinery, they weren't enough. America eats too much. America moves too much. America depends on truckers far more than anyone ever admitted. The military was built for war, not the daily survival of 330 million people scattered across thousands of miles. They didn't know the routes. They didn't know the back roads. They didn't understand how fragile the supply chain really was. By the fourth day of military distribution, they were already overwhelmed. I saw it with my own eyes. Soldiers exhausted, convoys stranded without fuel, lines stretching miles long. That's when the riots truly exploded. All across America, desperate people broke into National Guard armories. Food trucks were hijacked. Gas stations caught fire. Gangs formed overnight, taking over entire neighborhoods. And just when things couldn't get worse, America entered another war overseas, a resource war, fighting for dwindling global resources. We were starving at home while fighting for scraps abroad. That's when I knew the military was drowning. The strike stretched on. Weeks turned into months, and that year nearly killed me. It started with the cold. The power grid failed in rolling patches until half the city froze in the dark. I slept in 3 layers of clothes wrapped in blankets, my breath turning the air white while the smell of melting varnish drifted through the vents as neighbors burned furniture for heat. The cold made the hunger worse. Starvation changes your senses. You start smelling things you shouldn't, like someone 2 floors down heating ramen over a candle. My stomach cramped so hard some nights I curled into a ball and cried, praying for sleep just to escape the pain. But the gangs were the real reason we stayed inside. They took over gas stations and churches, patrolling at night with flashlights and rifles like self-appointed kings of the wasteland. Once, driving home with my last bit of fuel in my tank, I had to reverse down an entire street in the dark, hands shaking as a group blocked the road with abandoned cars. That fear became my shadow. They say you get used to the dark. You don't. You just learn to navigate it. By month 6, February, I think, the rolling blackouts stopped rolling. They just stayed off. Memphis wasn't a city anymore. It was a graveyard of concrete and steel, frozen under an ice storm that nobody had the heat to melt. Earlier that morning, I heard someone moving slowly in the hallway, a dragging shuffle that didn't sound like strength, just exhaustion. When I opened my door a few inches, I saw Mr. Harris from 3C leaning against the wall, breathing hard. He looked thinner than I remembered, his cheeks hollow, his coat hanging off his shoulders like it belonged to someone else. He'd always been kind to me in the old world, always held the elevator, always asked about my day. Seeing him like that pulled something in my chest. I reached into my cabinet and handed him a pack of crackers and a small can of tuna. It wasn't much, but it was what I could spare. He accepted it with a shaky hand and a soft nod, the kind of gratitude that didn't need words. Then he pushed himself upright and kept moving down the hall, disappearing around the corner without looking back. He quietly whispered there was a food drop and that it would be later that day. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to another human being before speaking to Mr. Harris, but I needed more supplies and a chance I was willing to take. The rumor mill, mostly scribbled notes taped to the few working water pumps, claimed there was a supply drop happening at the old Kroger on Union Avenue. Not the military. They had retreated to the air bases by then, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the riots. This was something else. Maybe a black market truck. Maybe a trap. Hunger creates a specific kind of madness. It convinced me to go. I wrapped my torso in magazines under my coat, poor man's armor. I didn't walk down the sidewalks anymore. I moved through the alleys, stepping over frozen trash bags that I prayed were just trash bags. When I reached the parking lot, there was no truck, no food, just them. There were 4 of them, standing by a fire barrel, their shadows stretching long against the boarded-up storefront. They weren't looking for food. They were looking for people looking for food. I tried to back away, my boot crunching on a patch of old gray snow. One of them turned. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the dead air. I ran. I scrambled over a chain-link fence, tearing my jeans, my breath burning my lungs like inhaled glass. I ducked into the shell of an abandoned AutoZone. I could hear them behind me, laughing. They weren't hungry. They were bored. That made them worse. I hid behind a tipped-over display rack, gripping a heavy rusted wrench I found on the floor. My hands didn't shake. That was the scariest part. I realized in that moment that the terrified woman from when this all started no longer existed. She was prepared. A man stepped through the broken glass of the entrance. "Come on out, sweetheart," he rasped. "We got heat." I waited. I controlled my breathing, counting the seconds between his footsteps. When he passed my aisle, I didn't plead. I didn't cry. I swung the wrench. I hit him in the knee, hearing the sickening pop of bone, and as he fell screaming, I didn't finish him. I didn't apologize. I just ran back into the night, melting into the shadows that had become my only friend. I made it back to my apartment and barricaded the door. I sat in the corner, shivering, eating one of my few remaining MRE meals I had been saving for 2 weeks. Outside, a Humvee drove past, one of the few military patrols left. The soldiers looked terrified, peering out of their turrets at the dark windows of my building. They had rifles, body armor, and tanks. But looking at them through my blinds, I realized the truth. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't shoot. Desperation. You can't bomb hunger. You can't court-martial a supply chain. The military was trying to hold up a collapsing ceiling with a broomstick. The lights weren't coming back on, and neither was our humanity. Eventually, the government broke, and so did the big carriers. People say it was because of policy changes or negotiations, but that's not what I heard on the street. The rumor that kept circulating, the one people whispered with their backs to the wall, was that a few senators, corrupt brokers, and CEOs were kidnapped, tortured, forced to face the same kind of hunger the rest of us lived with every day. I don't know if that part is true, but after what I saw that year, I can believe almost anything. All I know for sure is this. They finally realized the military couldn't save a country without its truck drivers. When the government caved, it happened fast. Like a dam cracking, the drivers got everything they'd been screaming for, the top pay they were owed, strict limits on autonomous trucks, the fraudulent brokers wiped out, and dispatchers who actually knew what the hell they were doing. But none of that mattered to me in the moment. I remember exactly how I learned the strike was over. I felt it before I heard it. A low vibration crept up through the floorboards, the kind you feel in your teeth. Then it grew, rolling through the walls like distant thunder. I thought it was another riot at first, or worse, gunfire. But then I caught the rhythm of it, engines, big ones. I ran to the window, palms sweating against the glass. A convoy rolled down the highway, silver grills gleaming like armor, air horns blaring a sound I never realized I'd missed so much. The ground actually shook beneath me, and right there, standing alone in my apartment, I broke. Not graceful tears, not emotional movie crying. I was sobbing, shaking, ugly, exhausted sobs that emptied out everything I'd been holding in for months. But the trucks coming back didn't fix the world. Streetlights flickered on again, sure, but half the city was still burned out. Stores opened, but the shelves filled slowly, like they were scared to trust us. People still hoarded. People still watched each other like predators in a shared cage. The grocery store near me put in new locks, armed security guards, and kept a shotgun behind the counter. The owner didn't even hide it anymore. He wanted us to see it. Neighbors nodded out of habit, but no one talked. No one asked how you were doing. We all already knew the answer. America was still fighting overseas, chasing scraps of resources while we tried to stitch ourselves back together at home. The riots died down, but the tension never really left. Things were quieter, but not safer, not normal, just quieter. And after living through hell that year, I learned that quiet can be its own kind of threat. People like to pretend life went back to normal afterward. It didn't. Not for me. Not for anyone who lived through that year. The military did their best, but they couldn't save us. Because the truth is simple. This country doesn't run on electricity or politics or even money. It runs on people. People who wake up early, sacrifice holidays, drive through storms, sleep in parking lots. People whose labor holds the entire nation together. Truck drivers aren't just part of America. They are America. And I'll never forget what happened when they stopped. I lived it. I survived it. And I'll die telling the story so no one forgets. Not even the military could save us. Thank you for listening to another riveting story from the Driver's Lounge, an Anomaly podcast production by Monzum. And if you're a Class A CDL driver, be sure to visit their website at monzum.com for top-paying CDL jobs near you. Until next time, drive safe, drive smart,